This video is chapter 3 of 5 of a special interview series I've put together on the life and achievements of MSR founder Mr. Larry Penberthy, told from the perspective of Larry's three surviving daughters, Laura, Doris, and Louise. For more interesting MSR and Larry Penberthy history, make sure to check out the other videos in this series. Laura, you mentioned at the start of our discussion here that you actually had some kind of pre-prepared information. Would you like to discuss that at all right now?
Certainly. So everything that I have was inspired by something that was either in your questions or something that was in one or more of the materials that I sent to you, or that some of them, of course, you had already found. So I'll describe what it relates to and then tell the story. One of the things that I found was his high school and college transcripts, which were fun to look at and see that Doris was correct. His major was physics, minor in German, and then
minor in math.
Minor in math.
Yeah.
Or were there two minors? I'd have to look at it again.
Maybe.
There were two.
Yeah, math and German. It was fun to see that he had done well as a student, both in high school and in college. Although at the College of Puget Sound, he did happen to fail the physical education class. And I think that's because he just never went to class. If you look at the other classes he was taking that semester, it's like, yeah, I can see where he didn't really have the time, and that was the one that could go. Along the way there, I think in high school, he took a couple of Latin classes, and there's 2 credits of Latin that are listed there. And that was common for education in that era, for there to be a little bit of Latin. So that reminded me of something he showed me once in Latin. So I'm going to see if I can find that and share my screen and show it to you. Okay, so in Latin.
I remember a slightly different version, but
Okay, Louise, go ahead. What does it mean? Translate.
so it's a joke. I actually took a semester of Latin at the University of Puget Sound, and I put this on the board one day during Latin class, and everybody was looking at it so seriously, could not figure out what it is. And finally, the professor said, "Okay, Louise, what does it say?" "Oh, see, Billy, see her go 40 buses in a row." "Oh no, Billy, them is trucks." I remember the last line is "got a load of cows and ducks." But see what is in them, cows and ducks. And I started with this, and everyone in the class was just laughing.
And I remembered this, and I looked it up on the web because I couldn't remember exactly how it was spelled in Latin. So Louise, and that you remember the last line is "got a load of cows and ducks." Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I remember too. But none of the versions that I found online had it that way.
Oh.
All of them had "si vad is in them." "O si Billy, si ergo, 40 buses in a row. Oh no, Billy, them is trucks. Si vad is in them, cows and ducks." So that's a schoolboy Latin joke from decades ago.
Decades.
Yes, and I knew Louise would remember it. Doris, do you
yeah.
remember ever hearing this from him?
No.
Okay. Well, there's one other thing that we've contributed, because he just wrote it out and said, "What do you think this means?" And I'm looking at it going, "What?" And he's like, "Well, just read it aloud." "Oh, see," because one of your questions was about his sense of humor. Another story that I wanted to tell was later in his life, as happens to many people, he had some health issues. And one of the things that was done for him was he had a pacemaker installed. And a pacemaker, that's not too big of a deal for a procedure. And so he was recovering well, and they said, "Okay, you can get up and walk around now, but we still want you to have an IV line in you. So we'll just put the IV bag on one of the poles with wheels on the bottom, and you can take the IV pole with you out into the hallway." So that's what he did, and he's walking along in the hallway, and he walked up to another patient who had a heart procedure done. And this elderly gentleman was feeling very glum, and Papa said that his face was just down and completely in a frown. He also had an IV bag on a pole with him. And our father walked up next to him and looked at him and said, "Hey, buddy, want a drag?" And he said that gentleman's face just turned up into a huge smile. And for me, that's my favorite joke he's ever told, because the image of two elderly gentlemen with IV poles drag racing down a hospital hallway, to me, is just so funny. But that's exactly his sense of humor.
I can just picture that. Yeah.
I'd forgotten that story.
Yeah, yeah. That's my favorite one.
It sounds very sort of dry, kind of tongue-in-cheek, clever.
Yes.
Yes, it was. It was very much take something unexpected from another situation and apply it to this situation. But it was, yes. And I'm sure the nurses would have loved that if they'd been both shuffling along with their little IV poles. I know that not everyone is comfortable with Facebook, but for those of us who do look at Facebook from time to time, there can be some fun things. And Bruce Johnson, who did the interview about MSR for Utah State University, and who did the book and has his Old Gear project, he has a web page for the History of Gear. He has a Facebook page for the History of Gear project. And a few days ago, he posted a photo of a fellow climber from 1970. So his question to his audience on Facebook was, how many items of gear in this picture can you identify? So everyone is saying, oh, it's this down jacket, and I remember we had one, and it has snaps and not a zipper, and there's these, she's wearing these boots and this, and then somebody says, oh, and that's an MSR Thunderbird ice axe. Well, then immediately somebody else says, oh no, I don't think MSR made ice axes in 1970. And then somebody else says, oh yes, they did, I had one. So then all of a sudden there's this whole discussion about MSR ice axes and the history on Facebook. Well, they talked it through. They concluded, yes, they did. Somebody referred them to the website that Cascade Designs maintains about MSR gear. And there it has the history and it has it documented. But this was my favorite part. This is a metal ice axe instead of a wooden ice axe. So here's a comment. The change, however, was radical from the existing wooden models, and many climbers resisted the development from the classic materials. Yvonne Chouinard famously referenced the Dayglow metal monster more suitable for assassination than ice climbing. And I thought, what an apt description of an orange MSR metal ice axe. The comment goes on to say, yet the undoubted strength of the Thunderbird and the preceding Eagle model that MSR also produced set the trend, and during the 1970s, all axe manufacturers transitioned to metal and lightweight alloy materials. Yes, so we hope they don't use them for assassinations, but they are more superior equipment.
Well, you had mentioned to me previously about, can you re-elaborate on the story you told me before about the naming of one of these axes and how Larry kind of spoke with you when you were a young girl?
Yeah. I think I was 14, and we could check from the MSR newsletters. But this was the ice hawk tool, the tool that you stick right in the ice wall. He was sitting at the dining room table drawing something and called me over and said, well, this is what this tool is, and this is what it does, and I'm having trouble coming up with a name for it. What do you think it looks like? And I looked at it and I went, well, it's kind of got a beak on it and kind of looks kind of fierce. And I went, it's for ice climbing. It's an ice hawk. And he was like, okay. So I walked away, and a little while later he called me back, and I'm thinking, oh, what does he want now? And so I went back and looked at the drawing, and he'd written ice hawk on the drawing. So that's why that tool has that name, is because I came up with that name. So there's my little contribution to the MSR equipment.
You're a very influential person in the trajectory and the history of ice climbing. Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
But sorry, I interrupted you. But did you have more in terms of your stories and stuff like that?
I do have one more story. Part of the ice axe development process was that he tested ice axes in our backyard. So he was stress testing them to see how many pounds of pressure the ice axes could take. And of course, he was testing wooden ice axes and metal ice. So if we've just seen from the Facebook post that the first metal ice axe came out pretty promptly, 1970, after the company was founded in 1969, then that means that I'm only about 7 years old. So to have my father show me a wooden ice axe that is broken and splintered at a certain number of pounds of pressure, and a metal ice axe that is only bent at a far greater amount of pounds of pressure. As a 7-year-old, perhaps I'm impressed, but I don't really know what he's talking about. Anyhow, I remember him showing me the ice axes.
Ah.
Yeah.
But then the house on Admiral Way, on the Admiral Way street side, the house is one story. And at that point, the hill goes down very steeply into Schmitz Park. So on the other side of the house, going downhill, the house is 2 stories. And it has a very nice backyard. So what our father did is he climbed up on the roof of the house and went to the very top peak beam of the house at the point of the roof. And on that beam, he affixed a large metal plank with a hook on the end, and he bolted it onto the beam. And from that hook, he hung a mountain climbing rope. But at the end of the rope was a loop made of the webbing that you use to make harnesses, except that it was a couple layers thick, and it was sewn, I think, 3 or 4 webbing sections wide, all sewn together, and it was a swing. And you could sit in it and then kick your feet on the ground and swing back and forth as far as your little feet could kick you up into the air on one side and swing back. So it was intended to swing back and forth long ways on the rectangular backyard. However, after a while, Louise figured out that if you grabbed a hold of the loop of the webbing and actually put it around your body so that the bottom of the loop was in front of you and you were hanging onto it, looking away from the house along the short side of the backyard, if you ran as fast as you could towards the fence, by the time you got to the fence, the length of the rope with the webbing around your midsection would lift you up, and you could put your feet on the top of the chain link fence.
Goodness, I did do that. Oh, scared the bejabbers out of our mother.
Yes.
And then I would unloop it from myself and hang on it, and I'd walk myself around the fence. And then it took a bend, and I'd walk myself around there, and I think I would grab on and swing down again. I'm sure that must have really, oh gosh, I'd forgotten about that. I was just thinking there's actually a photo of Catherine, Doris's younger daughter, sitting in that suit, or it might have been Sharon, I can't remember. But yeah, that's right, I did used to do that.
Yes. So once your feet were on the fence, as Louise described, then you took the loop off from around your body, and you were standing on the fence, holding yourself up, hanging on to the loop of webbing, swing. And then you would walk, as she said, across the top of the fence to the corner. When you got to the corner, you were hanging on to the very end of the loop because it needed that much rope to get that far. Then you walked along about halfway on the short side of the fence, and then you'd hold the webbing loop and you'd put
Oh,
your
yeah.
knee into the loop and jump off the fence with the webbing loop and swing all the way across long ways of the backyard. And when we did that, our mother said, I just didn't watch.
Yeah. Oh,
So that was
gosh.
our homemade backyard swing made for us by our father. And we
Yeah.
played on that for years and years.
Yeah.
Sounds like there is adventure ingrained in your DNA after all.
Well, yeah.
Kind of on that note, then, with the testing you've just mentioned, Laura, so MSR spans a number of years. I think it was 1969, correct, when he started it, up until early 80s, right?
1980. The sale to REI went through either in 1980 or 1981. I'm not sure, but I know it was one of those 2 years.
Mm.
Yeah.
So how did that influence or impact, I guess maybe family life? Like Doris, you said you had gone on the kind of business trips with traveling, and there's obviously a lot of responsibility with running a business, with running MSR, with running multiple business units with Penberthy Electromelt. There's a lot of demands with that sort of thing, and then having a family on top of that. I don't actually have children myself, but I can only imagine how he must have been very driven. Can you comment on any of that?
Yes, as our mother put it, he has bitten off more than he can chew. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was too much for one person to do. And I was, just in school because I graduated from high school in 1981. But he was spread pretty thin in those years. And I think Louise had an opportunity to spend a little more time with him than I did. And Louise can speak to this about having had an opportunity to work with him for a little while.
Oh, yeah. I think like Doris did, I actually worked for Mountain Safety Research. I graduated a semester early from high school, and I worked there as, they called it a clerk typist, from then until I went to college. Because he had the one building, as I recall, and both of the businesses ran out of that building, but there was also a separate building that I think where the MSR manufacturing was done. I wish you could talk to May. What was her May?
I know who you're talking about. Yeah, she was still working at Cascade Designs on MSR products when you and I visited in about 2011. And she was about ready to retire at that point. But yeah.
She worked for MSR for years. She worked up to supervisor and so forth. But yeah, I worked for the business, and I recall, I think it was a little odd saying Papa to the owner of the business, but he was my dad. I think he gave. So Doris, you worked at Penberthy Electromelt, right? And I think our cousin,
yeah,
and I think our cousin, and our cousin Pam also worked for Penberthy Electromelt, and
it was his way of helping us financially. He would pay us,
yeah.
but we would be doing something that was productive for him and for ourselves.
Yeah. So I don't think Sue ever did that, but
I don't know. The one thing you're saying about working for a summer and then about how having all these businesses, the first time, well, I don't know which time I worked for him, instead of just working in the office, he gave me this task of organizing all his patents. And it took me 3 months. Well, I had some office work in there, but it took me almost 3 months just to get them sorted out because he would lose track of where the patents were, or they had been renamed, or they had been revised, or whatever over time, and maybe they were assigned to a different company. It was really, it was a task, and no computers were involved at that time.
yeah.
But yes, he was involved in different things, and sometimes things escaped him, and that's why he wanted me to do the patent research. Um,
Wow. How
so
many did he have, do you reckon?
lots.
Uh,
I can't even imagine 20, 30.
Wow.
I actually have in
somewhere
maybe.
in his name and sorry, go ahead, Doris.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, I think I have a patent application for the ice axe. Let me look. I think I found it online someplace or maybe in something.
Yeah.
Kind of on that same note, I think rewinding a little bit, um, I guess two things. Like Luis, you mentioned the stove that he gave you that you still have. Do you know what model stove that is? And also on the patents note, Doris, like I'm curious about the wind tunnel I've seen. That's so simple but really kind of elegant and practical. You know, was that I've never seen that anywhere before prior to that. Is there a story or you know can you patent that process or like can you guys comment on those two items?
Well, I can tell you that my stove is a Model G. And when I worked for MSR, I remember someone writing in asking for a catalog that contained that stove that sounds like an SST taking off.
Oh,
They
yes.
were loud. As I recall, I think Laura told me this story. The first thing the MSR engineers did when it was sold to RAI was they developed a new stove that was quiet, and that's the Whisper Light.
Ah,
Whereas
that's
our
called it.
dad's our dad's stoves were just loud, but that was him. He didn't care about aesthetics. If he could take a quart of snow to boiling water in 3.5 minutes and save someone from hypothermia, that's what he didn't care about the noise.
Okay, so the wind tunnel story, are you talking about the mountain tent testing?
Yes, sorry, I should the testing, the tent
Yeah,
testing on top of
yes,
the
the
truck.
tent testing, yes, because you can't just run down to Boeing when you want to test a tent to see how it behaves in 60-mile-an-hour winds and say, hey, can we borrow your wind tunnel? So if you're my dad, you get an old blue truck and build a wooden frame over the bed of the truck and set up the tent on the truck and drive the truck at 60 miles an hour down the freeway with the tent on it to see how it does in 60-mile-an-hour winds. So yes, there are pictures of the tent on the truck. And one of them has, of course, a female employee, and they said, just please get up and sit inside the tent and smile so that we have a picture of you. I do not believe that she was in the tent on the
Okay.
truck on the freeway. I,
No.
I think that was just a let's take a picture later,
Yeah.
photo opportunity. But yes, that's what he did for wind testing that tent was to put it on the truck and take it down the freeway.
It's sort of an example of take what you have and see if you can make it
Yeah.
work for what you need.
I know MSR exists and there's companies and stuff, but in a very tangible, real way, like you guys are the Penberthy legacy. You know, so, how do you think he would want to be remembered? And your both of your parents, your mothers and your father, but and perhaps yourselves as well. It's a big question, but
Well, I think that he would want to be remembered for the contributions that he made
Hmm.
in the area of electric melting for glass furnaces, in mountaineering equipment and making things safer for outdoors enthusiasts, just for having come up with new things that helped people that they still use. I think that that's what he would like to be remembered for.
Well, he was one of the, I would say, other
I,
than World War II, though, the nuclear stuff that was going on, that he was an, after the atomic bomb and all that kind of stuff, it wasn't too long after that that he was thinking about, okay, what do we do about nuclear this and nuclear that? And he made dosimeters. Did you know he made dosimeters?
hmm,
That calculate people's exposure to
oh,
radiation. And he
yeah.
made
really,
the
wow.
yeah, he made the glass that went in the dosimeters. And that was early Seattle time, I think, because I remember them. Uh,
Hmm.
so, and the other thing was the lead shielding glass, which was a big
Yeah.
deal for particularly in Hanford and other places too. So, She was early in some areas,
Yeah.
I guess I should say, that
Yeah.
are still around, or issues or whatever now.
Yeah, I agree with them. I think he would, and I think he was proud of all of his kids. And
It's hard for me to tell.
ah, I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was. He was.
Well, I think he was glad that we all ended up doing at least college, 4 years of college, and other
Mhm.
training after that, or going to graduate school, or whatever
Yeah.
education we could get that worked for us. We all did that. Even if
Yeah.
Laura, well, Laura, I don't know if you want to get into this, but um, your original thought when you graduated from high school was not to go to college, was to go somewhere else. And you finally got to do that, but you had to finish college first. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It was kind of a winding path
Hmm.
because I had always loved to play with hair. And so I wanted to see if I could be a hair designer professionally.
Mm.
And that was not really an acceptable route to our parents, though it later on our father found out that you can actually earn a decent living cutting hair. And so then he was okay with it. But our mother said, we want you to get a 4-year liberal arts education. Well, I was happy to go off and do that, and went to college and got a degree in French, which was really fun, but I had never intended to become a French teacher. So then I went to beauty school, got a cosmetologist license, worked as a hair designer for 3 years, and it was fine for that long. And then I was done with it and wanted to move on. And then the bachelor's degree came in very handy because for my master's degree in library and information science, they wanted you to have a bachelor's degree, but they didn't care what it was in. So it made that application process a lot easier. I got the master's in library science and have been doing information management ever since. Came in very handy that I could cut our mother's hair. And
Yes.
that
Oh,
that was the
yes.
piece that really worked, was to be able to do haircuts for her. I gave her a haircut on March 9th, I think it was, 2020. March 10th, I started working from home. March 11th, the county where she lived said, nope, no visitors. We're in a pandemic. You may not come here. She didn't get a haircut for 6 months. Thank heavens I did not make any mistakes on that haircut because it grew out just fine. So being able to cut hair has been a very useful, practical skill.
Multifaceted. I see.
Can I tell one more story about Papa?
Big
So
story.
there's this reflex you can see in young babies that Doris might remember. When you stroke up the sole of their foot, they'll curl their toes in. But from about age 3 months to 6 months, they'll actually flex their toes out. It's called the Babinski reflex. Well, our dad would be lying on the sofa reading something or other, and I don't know if Laura did, but I'd sneak up, and I would run my finger up the sole of his foot, and he'd do the Babinski reflex like he was 3 months old. And sometimes I'd pinch his toe, and then a second later he'd go, ow, and twitch it. And then I'd pinch the toe on the left foot, and he'd flex his right foot and go, ow. Again, droll, strange sense of humor.
Sense of humor.